She's set for sainthood, but is she whiter than white? As Pope Francis starts the process for Mother Teresa of Calcutta to become a saint, we're asking tough questions about her legacy. Also on today's program, walling others out or walling ourselves in. Look at the psychology of Europe's new obsession with building barriers. And in picture this, up and away, a new milestone in the race towards space tourism. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Her name is synonymous with charity and selfless service. And less than 2 decades after her death, Mother Teresa of Calcutta is being fast-tracked to sainthood. Pope Francis confirmed this week a second miracle attributed to the Roman Catholic nun, setting her on the road for one of the quickest canonizations in modern times. But not everyone agrees that Mother Teresa is whiter than white. And as her life is re-examined, allegations of financial misconduct and fundamentalism have come to the surface once more. Today's newsmaker is Mother Teresa of Calcutta, a woman whose legacy still inspires devotion among her followers and revulsion among her critics.
Revered as the saviour of the poor, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, a selfless icon, a Catholic celebrity, and now on the fast track to sainthood, the Blessed Teresa of Calcutta, known as Mother Teresa. Pope Francis has recognised her second miracle, paving the way for a sainthood. The miracle, curing a Brazilian man of multiple brain tumours after his loved ones prayed to Mother Teresa in heaven. She was put on the path to sainthood less than 2 years after her death. But how does one become a saint? The first step, in general, is to wait 5 years after the candidate's death. The cooling off period is so their case can be evaluated objectively. The next is to be declared a servant of God. A bishop investigates their life and deeds to see if they're worthy. Step 3 is to show proof of a life of heroic virtue. The Congregation for the Causes of Saints scrutinises the evidence and makes recommendations to the Pope. The fourth step is beatification, proof the nominee has ascended into heaven with a miracle attributed to prayers to them. And then, if a second miracle can be verified, a person can be canonised. Generally a long journey, Mother Teresa's rise to saintly status has been rather swift, and some question whether she really did lead a life so deserving. Born into poverty in Albania in 1910, Mother Teresa joined an Irish convent at the age of 18. Months later, she left for India. Following what she described as a call from Jesus, she established the Missionaries of Charity to care for the poor. By the time of her death, 4,000 nuns worked in more than 600 of her foundations worldwide. She inspired charity and won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1979. But to her critics, Mother Teresa was a fundamentalist, a fanatic, and a fraud. She heavily opposed reform suggested by the Second Vatican Council to make the Church more open. She is accused of having a hardline ideology that loved poverty and saw suffering as a gift from God. When accepting her Nobel Prize, some in the audience were shocked by her political message.
The greatest destroyer of peace today is the cry of the innocent, unborn child. For if a mother can murder her own child in her own womb, what is left for you and for me to kill each other?
Her charity work is also clouded by allegations of misuse of funds and for accepting donations from dubious figures, most notably Haitian dictator Jean-Claude Duvalier. Under Pope John Paul II's tenure, the number of beatifications and canonizations have skyrocketed. And some critics question whether the Church has properly investigated the case for Mother Teresa's canonisation. They argue the Catholic Church has been seduced by the lure of showbiz and public relations, and her quickie canonisation is an exercise in popularity rather than virtue. Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss Mother Teresa's legacy, we're joined by Father Robert Gall in Rome, and in Birmingham is Gizem Alpion, author of Mother Teresa, Saint or Celebrity. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Father Robert Gall, let's start with you. Has Pope Francis made the right decision?
Well, I think absolutely. Pope Francis chose to canonize at this point Mother Teresa for two reasons. First of all, they just concluded the analysis of the miracle that took place in Brazil, and they verified that medically it is inexplicable, and that theologically it was really due to prayer, and therefore to divine intercession. And secondly, because Mother Teresa is the face of mercy for millions, perhaps billions of people around the world. And Pope Francis is dedicating his entire papacy to mercy, to God's mercy, and to the obligation that all of us have to show mercy to our fellow human beings. So Mother Teresa, when she's canonized in September probably, will be a face for the year of mercy.
Father, you know, she was against contraceptives, against the use of condoms in India and Africa and elsewhere. Upon acceptance of her Nobel Peace Prize, as we just heard, she said abortion is the greatest destroyer of peace. I wonder, when you consider how much goodwill Pope Francis has managed to attract to the Church during his brief tenure, isn't conferring sainthood on someone so seemingly heavily out of touch with the times, and in fact a supporter of policies that might exacerbate poverty, something that's quite strange?
Well, Pope Francis has made his teaching very much, and also his personal example, about defending those who are outcast, about the peripheries, about those who are marginalized, which is exactly what Mother Teresa did. In order to defend the poor, in order to defend those people who really don't have any power and are suffering from violence and are being victimized, what is needed are principles that are strong and that will protect the poor, those who are at the mercy of those who might attack them. And that's exactly what Mother Teresa did with respect to the unborn. She said, I will take care of you, I will protect you, even if your own mother is not interested in you and doesn't even want you to exist. I will come and help, so I will also help your mother in protecting you as a child. So that once they are born, Mother Teresa and her nuns would take care of any child who was abandoned. So there were no unwanted children.
Okay, Gizem Alpion, is it unusual that this has been made so easy for her, from canonization to beatification to now the sort of, approval? It usually takes decades, doesn't it? What makes it so different with Mother Teresa?
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I don't think it's very quickly for Mother Teresa. Well, I expected, to be frank with you, Mother Teresa to be canonized during the time of her best friend, Pope John Paul II. But for reasons which we don't have time to discuss in the program, that was delayed, particularly because of the disclosure of Mother Teresa's dark night of the soul. I am a scholar of religion, and I don't follow any particular faith, but I myself have been campaigning for a couple of years for Mother Teresa to be a saint, and I am delighted. And I know from the response that I have received from Mother Teresa's supporters or through the media from Brazil to India that the news have been received quite well, and I know that the news have been received quite well in the Balkans, in Albania, in Kosovo, where Mother Teresa's father came from, because Mother Teresa's mother was born in Skopje. I know that the Albanians are delighted, and I have heard that even Albanians in Turkey, or Turkish citizens of Albanian descent, they are delighted by the news.
Yeah, Gizem, we spoke to somebody from Calcutta, where she did her work, a former editor of The Statesman, Calcutta's oldest newspaper, Sunanda Datta Ray. He gave us a few interesting statements on the record. I'll just read a couple to you. He said that, when he was asked to interview Mother Teresa for a TV program, on the eve of the interview, he did a prep visit and asked Mother Teresa some slightly uncomfortable questions to do with theology. And the next day he discovered he'd been removed as the interviewer at her own insistence. And she said she wasn't going to do the interview if he was going to be her interviewer. And he also said that she might be a hero in India, but that's not directly a result of her good work. He said that India is flattered by the good publicity it has given Calcutta. Is Sunanda Dattare just overly cynical? Has he missed it?
I can see his point, but I have been in Calcutta myself. I have seen the wonderful work that the nuns and the brothers are doing. I think it's very easy to see why some Indians are insulted, but seeing, if you like, the poverty of Calcutta, and I'm quite sure that Calcutta is not all about poverty, seeing the wonderful work that Mother Teresa started in 1949 and then with the foundation of the Missions of Charity in 1950, I think that this lady deals something remarkable. And I think the value is for us in the West that we forget that the human debris, the unfortunate, the marginalized are everywhere, not only in Calcutta. They are in England, they are in the Balkans, they are all over the world. And Mother Teresa, we know that she was a religious missionary. She highlighted the significance of human dignity. And in this respect, I understand why the Pope took the courageous decision to canonize Mother Teresa, because the Vatican understands the significance of Mother Teresa also even after her death. And I think it's a remarkable decision, and we have to applaud it. Now, I'm not into miracles. I mean, as I said earlier, I don't have a particular religion. I am a spiritual rationalist myself. I would have preferred that Mother Teresa was canonized simply because she held sacred human dignity. And I believe now the Vatican has a wonderful opportunity also to consider recognizing the state of Kosovo, where Mother Teresa, her parents and grandparents came from.
Yeah, interesting that you mentioned that, because I want to move on to politics, particularly politics in that region. Father Robert Gall, separation of church and state, invariably someone like Mother Teresa gets embroiled in politics and global politics. She took money from and praised Jean-Claude Baby Doc Duvalier when he ruthlessly ruled Haiti. She glowingly praised Albanian dictator Enver Hoxha and was close to the family. Shouldn't these aspects tarnish her legacy, don't you think?
Well, of course, all of her work was invariably connected with politics, because respecting human dignity and the common good should be the fundamental aim of all governments. It's also true that Mother Teresa was influential in politics around the world at many important occasions. She spoke before President Bill Clinton in the United States in Washington, D.C. She met with Saddam Hussein in 1991. She was very involved, and always, constantly, she was defending those who seemed to be defenseless. She was defending those who were victims of human rights abuses. But she wasn't speaking about promoting a particular party, nor was she speaking about overthrowing tyrannical regimes. Instead, she was speaking to people's hearts, and she was challenging them to accept the image of God in the human person, so that they would change their style of government if, in fact, they were taking advantage of people's rights. And she was doing that if it was with Bill Clinton, with Saddam Hussein, or if it was with the King of Saudi Arabia. She was constantly at the highest levels, without any fear of human respects, speaking truth to power. And she was doing so with a total attitude of self-sacrifice, because she was in love with God, whom she found in other human beings.
Father Robert Gall and Gizem Alpion, thank you very much, both of you, for joining us. Still to come on the Newsmakers, the psychology of walls. We ask what's behind Europe's flurry of barrier building. And in Picture This, holiday to outer space, we tell you why space tourism could be just around the corner. This year has seen Europe gripped by a refugee crisis and unprecedented security fears. As a result, European countries have been building walls like never before. There are now more walls and fences on European borders than at any time since the Cold War. The Newsmakers' Duncan Crawford has been investigating what's behind this new trend of building barriers and what it says about us.
Walls are going up across Europe. The refugee crisis prompting barriers to be built, and now a Europe that once promised integration is increasingly divided. Hungary has led the way, its right-wing government closing the country's frontier with Serbia and Croatia. Its border with Romania could be next. Where will it end? Will you surround your whole country in barbed wire?
When you're defending Europe, when you're defending your own freedoms, money is not the question. Hundreds of thousands of people are coming to Europe without any kind of discipline, without identification, and that's a serious security threat.
Greece and Bulgaria have also put up barriers to try to stop the flow of migrants and refugees from Turkey. Estonia and Latvia too plan fences along their borders with Russia.
The European Union had made enormous strides in establishing new and different norms that were predicated on liberal and democratic notions, openness, tolerance, etc., that Europe had rarely seen in its history. And now those are, of course, under assault by these conditions. And people desire security.
In Ukraine, the government's also pledged to build a security barrier to guard its border with Russia. It fears more territory could be lost after Moscow's seizure of Crimea last year. Only a fraction of the multi-million-dollar project has been completed. But it's in the heart of Europe that the 20th century's most notorious wall was put up.
The East German authorities worked feverishly night and day to complete it. Solid and apparently impregnable, concrete blocks 10 and 12 feet high, reinforced by tank traps.
The Berlin Wall divided the city for almost 3 decades. Built by East German authorities to prevent mass defections to the West, it became a symbol of the Cold War.
It established a demarcation between forms of governance, between ways of knowing, between ways of being in the world. And so I believed I was superior, and I believed my identity was wrapped in one side of the wall. I believed the reverse if I was on the other side of the wall. The wall became then an artifact of difference.
More than 100 people died trying to cross the Berlin Wall. In 1989, the wall came down. Its remnants now an open-air museum. The symbolism of this place is strikingly powerful. These leftover walls, they're a permanent reminder, a history lesson set in stone of the divisions which once split this country and Europe in two. A quarter of a century after Germany was reunited, Europe looks increasingly divided. More European countries than ever before are drawing their boundaries with razor wire fences, and with uncertainty over the refugee crisis and Russia's territorial ambitions, it seems these barriers will not be torn down anytime soon.
David Carter from Princeton University has done extensive research on why states build walls and fences at their borders, and he joins us now. Thanks for joining us, David. Are the Hungarians and other European nations justified in building walls and fences to keep out migrants and refugees?
Technically, states, have the ability to, defend their borders or, try to control their borders in whatever way they see fit. But I think justified is a strong word because these walls have, many negative effects that probably the builders of them, don't like to see.
In 1989, 1990, the walls came down in Europe. When they came down, we saw this as a sort of time of openness, as a time of cosmopolitanism. Now that the walls are coming back up, is the inverse of openness and cosmopolitanism necessarily happening? Closed-mindedness, intolerance, isolationism?
I think that's certainly one dimension that we really have to think about and worry about. After the end of the Cold War, it was very popular for commentators to talk about the emergence of a borderless world, that national borders were just much less important. We could freely move, certainly within Europe with the establishment of the EU. You could move from country to country. This had all kinds of economic benefits, but I think you see a trend against that since the year 2000 or so, where I've actually done some research with a co-author at the University of Chicago, Paul Post, where we've just looked at When have border fences and walls been built since 1900? And about 40% of them have been erected since the year 2000. So the description that you had in the preview to this segment of Europe, I think, is part of a general trend, and it's troubling. I think it does reflect sort of a turn away from the tolerance and openness and the promise of an integrated and open Europe.
Now, there are walls not only in Europe, but there are walls in the West Bank built by the Israelis. There's a wall built by the Indians to keep out Bangladeshis, the Americans to keep out Mexicans, and so on and so forth. If there's one common thread that connects all of these walls and barriers together, what is it?
Well, the most common factor, or the biggest factor in determining, when and where states build walls, is income inequality. So the places that are most likely to see walls erected are where you have bordering countries or neighboring countries that have stark differences in sort of their economic climate or how prosperous their economies are. So the U.S. and Mexico is a good example, right? The U.S. has been working on militarizing and fortifying the border with Mexico since the late 1990s, but you've seen no such effort in the northern border with Canada. So really, this border wall trend is more about economic security and economic inequalities than, historically you might think of the Great Wall of China as having, a major military component. That's really less relevant to why you see walls being built. It's more about keeping people and goods out. And the determinants are economic inequalities that provide incentives to move across borders.
And psychologically, for a population that is being perhaps perceived as being protected or protected by the wall, how much of an effect does that have on, say, Americans who know that there's a wall keeping Mexicans out?
The intention, I think, certainly by politicians that talk in favor of these walls and proponents of the walls is to try to make people feel safer. I think the reality is that they aren't really that effective, though. So, it is the case that, if you build a barrier between the U.S. and Mexico, so a good portion of the U.S.-Mexico border has walls along it, and walls are still being built, that does raise the cost of entry. Right, but it doesn't completely prevent people from entering. And what that does is, it makes it harder for people to move across the border. So increasingly, if you compare the 1980s, people moving from Mexico to the U.S. across the border to the current climate, in the 1980s, you would just walk across the border. It was very, very easy. Whereas by the late 1990s and certainly today, well over half of people coming across the border employ professional smugglers, organizations that use force. So one of the negative externalities, or the perhaps unintended consequences of these border walls is, they do produce violence because people still have incentive to move across them. It's just much, much harder to do. It's much more costly. So you pay smugglers to bring you across. And the fact that it becomes more costly raises the price and makes it more profitable for such organizations to move people and goods across fortified borders. So I think overall it doesn't make us safer, but that's certainly the perception, and that's what proponents of walls are trying to, they're trying to promote this idea that they're a safety barrier.
David Carter, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. In today's Picture This, do you perhaps fancy a holiday in space? It's not so unrealistic. Check this out.
To go to space with Leonardo DiCaprio.
Today's newsmaker has been Mother Teresa of Calcutta. She spent much of her life in the slums of Calcutta looking after the poor, the sick and the forgotten. She became a towering figure in the Catholic Church, a celebrity nun, and some say she misused her platform to promote an extremist agenda and mismanaged funds from well-wishers. The row over her legacy now threatens to overshadow the compassion she showed for ordinary people on the streets of Calcutta. By this time next year, Mother Teresa will probably be a saint, but in the end, it seems she was only human after all. You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. As always, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.